Okay, everyone, welcome to the third part of the video lecture for Chapter 2, The Chemical Context of Life. You may remember at the end of the second part of the video lecture for this chapter, I was talking about hydrogen bonds. I drew in an illustration of a hydrogen bond between a water molecule and an ammonia molecule because for some reason, whatever reason, the figure I had didn't show up. Well, this is the figure that you see right here. So I want to go back over this again real quick because hydrogen bonds very often confuse students. Again, the definition of a hydrogen bond is when you have a hydrogen atom that is covalently bonded to one electronegative atom, like the oxygen you see here in water. That hydrogen bond is also attracted to another electronegative atom on another molecule, like this nitrogen on the ammonia here. The reason why this hydrogen has a partial positive charge is because of the electronegativity of oxygen, pulling the electrons of that shared covalent bond toward itself, leaving the proton in the hydrogen to give it a positive charge. That positive charge attracts to the slight negative charge on the nitrogen. Now, why is the nitrogen on the ammonia negative? Because it's doing the same thing the oxygen in the water does. Nitrogen is also electronegative, so it pulls these electrons toward itself from the hydrogens, giving it a slight negative charge, leaving partial positives on the hydrogen side. So that opposite charge attraction between the hydrogen here and the nitrogen, that's a hydrogen bond. Again, we always show that as dashed or dotted lines to indicate that it's a weak bond. Okay. All right. The next thing to talk about, or the last thing really to talk about in this chapter, is the concept of molecular shape and function. Now, in previous, I think part 2, I talked about structure and function a little bit, and I said it's a very important concept in biology and chemistry, and structure and function implies that systems or objects or whatever do what they do because of their structure. They get their function from their structure. And certainly that's true with molecules like proteins and things, and DNA, for example. The shapes of those molecules, their structures, impart their function. There's a direct correlation or relationship between how they're put together and what they do. And so this is a very important concept in biochemistry and therefore cell biology. So a molecule shape then is usually very important to its function. And the shape is largely determined by the positions of the atom's orbitals. So the atoms that make up that molecule, they have orbitals. And we define an orbital in the previous part of this video lecture as the sort of three-dimensional space around the nucleus where you find electrons about 90 or 95% of the time. And I kind of showed them as some teardrop-shaped spaces around a carbon atom, if you recall that. So let me show you a figure here that will kind of help put this into perspective. All right, so let me zoom in on this a little bit. Okay, so here we have our water molecule. Remember I talked about the structure of the water molecule having the two hydrogens that come off at sort of a weird angle. There's 104.5 degrees between them, not 180. They don't come off directly across from one another. The reason is because there are two pairs of electrons not bonded around that oxygen. We have one here and one there. Those are found in their teardrop-shaped orbitals. These two electrons and these two electrons are being shared by the hydrogen and the oxygen, and you can see their orbitals right there. The important point of the orbital is that the orbitals dictate where the bonds form, all right? And because we're talking about covalent bonds here, we're talking about electrons that are being shared by these atoms, or not in the case of these unbonded pairs here and here. But the electrons in these unbonded pairs and of those covalent bonds that you see here and here have negative charge, and negative charge repels negative charge. So it causes these hydrogens to sort of swing out at these odd angles like this, like you see here, because that pair of electrons repels these electrons, these are repelling those are repelling those. So while all these electrons are around the oxygen, they're also as far away from each other as they possibly can be, and that's why you see the shape of water being what it is. Very important to the life-giving properties of water, as we'll see in the next chapter. Look at methane, CH4, carbon, 4 hydrogens around it. The hydrogens are located sort of at all 4 corners, so to speak, metaphorically, of that carbon atom, because those electrons in the covalent bonds repel each other. So they are as far away from each other as they can be while still being around the carbon. And here you see the 4 orbitals, okay? And that shape, that sort of tetrahedral shape, as it's called, let me write that. Tetrahedron rather, that is the shape that you see here. Think of a tetrahedron as sort of like a pyramid, but whereas a pyramid has a square base, a tetrahedron has a triangular base that you see right there. Okay, that's a tetrahedron. So when carbon bonds to 4 other atoms, that basic structure of those 5 atoms is tetrahedron, and it's a fundamental building block of a lot of organic molecules, as we'll see in the next chapter. So molecular shape then is crucial in biology because it determines how biological molecules specifically recognize and respond to each other. Great example of this is in the opiates. Opiates are a class of molecule. An example of it you may be familiar with is morphine. Morphine is a fantastic painkiller. When morphine was developed, and I think it was first used on the battlefield during World War II, it was considered a miracle drug because you could administer a vial or an ampule of morphine to a grievously wounded soldier, and within seconds the pain just goes away. So, how does morphine do this? Well, it actually mimics the shape of what's called a natural endorphin. Okay, so endorphins. Let me go to this next. Let me go to this next figure. Here you see a natural endorphin. So this is a large molecule. These are molecules that we have in our nervous system. They're produced by our nervous system, and they act as sort of natural painkillers. All right. So how does this work? Well, take a look at the figure in the bottom. Here we have a cell membrane. So this is the inside of a cell, that's the outside. This is the brain cell, okay? And in that membrane, we have proteins called endorphin receptors, these purple things. Those are proteins. All right, they act like sensors, okay? So when you're injured, you get a burn, a cut, a broken bone, whatever, what happens is that there's a pain response that is set up in your nervous system that tells you something's wrong. Pain is actually a good thing because it tells you something is wrong, right? If your hand is in the fire and you're not looking at it, you want to know that your hand is in the fire, and the pain tells you that. All right, but in a lot of cases we have a lot more pain produced than we actually need, so natural endorphins are produced, and notice they have this little section right there that fits like a key into a depression on the endorphin receptor. Think of it as a key going into a lock, and when that endorphin rather, binds to that protein, it shuts down the pain response that receptor is sending into the brain cell. So it helps to deaden the pain response, okay? But not all of the endorphin receptors are shut down because, again, you want to have a little bit of pain at least to tell you something's wrong. Well, morphine, even though it has overall a very different shape than the natural endorphin, this portion here has the same shape right there, okay? So it's like a key with a different shape on the head. The teeth are in the same configuration, and so morphine also fits into that endorphin receptor and shuts them all down. So there's a direct relationship here then between structure and function. As long as this portion of the molecule mimics the shape of that portion of the natural endorphin, this molecule morphine, which is artificial, has the same effect as the natural endorphin. All right, and that's the way that a lot of molecules or pharmaceutical products that are produced today, you see all these things on TV with the ads for these drugs and things have the weird names. Many of them have a very specific role to play, and they do or play that role because of their shape. They're sort of like designer drugs in the sense that the pharmaceutical industry designs them to have a certain shape that then gives them a certain function, which is why you're buying the drug, presumably. Okay, last thing to talk about in this chapter is chemical reactions. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about chemical reactions throughout the course of this class, this semester. But for now, just think of a chemical reaction as a process that makes and breaks chemical bonds. All right, so in a chemical reaction, what you have are molecules called reactants. Then you have an arrow, which indicates the progress of the reaction, and then you have what are called products on the right-hand side. So over the course of this reaction indicated by the arrow, the atoms that are making up these molecules are rearranged to make new molecules called products, okay? All right, here's an example. So first, just think of a reaction as a rearrangement of matter. We're not adding anything or taking anything away. We're just taking the atoms that are present in the reactants and rearranging them into something new. Here, for example, we have two molecules of molecular hydrogen, H2, H2. One molecule of molecular oxygen, O2. This is about 21% of the atmosphere you're breathing right now, okay, it's the oxygen. If you combine O2 and two molecules of H2 and put a spark to it, you get an explosion. The explosion that you see, the flash of light from the explosion, that's the reaction that's happening. And so what's happening is that the bonds here are being broken, and then all these atoms, hydrogens and oxygens, 4 hydrogens, 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 oxygens, are being rearranged. And they're rearranged into 2 water molecules. So if you notice, you have 1, 2 oxygens there. We had 2 here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 hydrogens. We had 4 there. So we still have the same number and type of atoms as we did in our reactants, but now in our products they're rearranged into something different. That's a chemical reaction. It's a very simple chemical reaction. Okay. Another important chemical reaction is photosynthesis. And we have an entire chapter on this process, and this is a very important process because it's the process plants use to make their food and your food. All right, so critically important. What plants do in photosynthesis is they combine 6 molecules of CO2 with 6 molecules of water, and in the presence of light energy, E with an up arrow means energy, all these atoms you see on the left-hand side are rearranged into one molecule of a sugar called glucose, C6H12O6, and we get 6 oxygens produced as a byproduct. Sorry about that line there, I don't know what that's going on there. Whoops, problems. Okay, so we basically have 6 molecules of CO2 combined with 6 waters in the presence of light energy inside a plant cell. These carbons, oxygens, and hydrogens are rearranged into one sugar and 6 molecules of oxygen. So let's do some accounting here to see that this is really just a rearrangement. We're not adding anything to or taking away. We have 6 CO2s. Every CO2 has 1 carbon, so 6 times 1 is 6. We have 6 carbons over here on the left. All 6 of them go right there. Okay, there are no more carbons. They're all right there. Now, oxygens. We have 6 times 2 is 12 in the CO2s, and 6 times 1 is 6 more in the waters, so that's 18 total. 6 go there, 12 go there, 18 oxygens, all right? Hydrogen. 6 times 2 is 12. All 12 go right there in the sugar. So from that, you can see that this really is just a rearrangement of matter. It's a solar-powered conversion of carbon dioxide and water to glucose and oxygen. All right, and you see the result of that right here. This is a plant, a pondweed called Elodea, and you can see bubbles of oxygen streaming up from the leaves and some that are actually sticking there on the leaves. And that's the oxygen being produced as this plant runs the process of photosynthesis. Okay, well that's it then for the video lectures for Chapter 2. This one's pretty short, but we have 3 in total. Look for the video lectures for Chapter 3 up next.